The name of the panel is Joint European Mentoring Initiative, Engaging European Scientific Diasporas in North America. So it will be going on for about an hour and 15 minutes. And I will hand the microphone over to the moderator of the panel, Dr. Irina Ramos.
Thank you, Victoria. First of all, thank you for the invitation from EuroAccess. And I will be very happy to present you 4 wonderful panelists that will be talking to you today about GEMI. So GEMI is a joint European mentoring initiative. It's the seeds that will be plants and trees, and we really hope to have many other plants and trees afterwards. And we'll tell you why. Hopefully, by the end of this panel, we'll be successful enough that you'll take home great message that there's place for everyone. Either if you are European, if you are part of the North American scientific community, or even if you are young or old, men or women, doesn't matter. There are places for mentors and mentees in any place, any phase of your scientific life. So I truly believe that we all share that GEMI major goal is to support and incite collaborations amongst European scientists in North America. It can be a great getaway for great scientific advancement and very much impactful on both personal and individual growth via mentorship opportunities. I myself am a Portuguese scientist. I've been in the United States since 2004. I came to do and pursue my PhD. And if it wasn't for the key mentors, key players of my professional life, I would have had so much more troubles to fit into the American society and also to even continue connecting the bridges in Portugal and in other European places that I nurtured those connections. So I truly believe that in order to succeed in at the current society pace, we all need a mentor. And we can all be mentors of younger scientists that teach us about the next scientific energy wave. So being a mentor is not thinking, oh, I need to know a lot of things in order to mentor someone. We end up learning so much from our mentees as well. There is place for everyone to benefit from others. So GEMI started with 2 workshops where diasporas, science counselors, and mentoring experts came together in a very relaxed, informal environment so we could all brainstorm in very tricky and challenging questions that EuroAccess places to us in the name of Dr. Deema and Victoria. It's interesting because you go to those places, these workshops, informal places, and you don't know almost anyone. And you have this idea, oh, I come with my cultural background, mine in particular from Portugal, and about 13 years in the US. So it's sort of a soup of mixtures of influences already. And then you start seeing at those questions and you start discussing with your peers that come from very different places in Europe. And we have very similar common backgrounds, very similar goals, and we all want the same thing, succeed in a very pleasant and healthy environment. So what the biggest challenge of those 2 workshops was when they divided us in 5 groups, right? And then we had a very important task. After the brainstorming from the morning session, we had each one of the groups to focus on 5 important things: the mission, the rationale, the pillars we wanted GEMI to rely on, eligibility, and then the operations, which is really where are we going next, right? How are we going to make these work and where are we going next? So this panel will go through all of those steps. We'll explain you very nicely how we came up with the proposal, and we'll highlight where we stand and how we're going to move forward with your help, because alone it's just a piece of paper. Together we can make a really robust network opportunity for both your younger you and your older you. So when you do that, can you imagine the sky is the limit, right? So with that, and no further, I will start introducing you. Dr. Stefano Lamy is coming from the Italian embassy. He is currently working at the Embassy of Italy here in Washington, D.C. as a science counselor. He will be talking to us about the rationale behind GEMI, why Italy is invested in this opportunity and this initiative, and it will convince us why others should also be invested. With that.
Thank you very much, Irina. Thanks to the Embassy of France and to Euraccess for this opportunity to organize this event. So before going through a couple of slides about GEMI and the rationale, I would like to explain why I'm very glad, excited about this initiative. In my previous life, before becoming a science counselor at Embassy of Italy, I spent a good part of my research career in this country, from a postdoc position up to a faculty position. So I experienced being both a mentee and a mentor, and knowing the challenges that young researchers have to face when they come to North America. They have to adapt to a new culture. I really have a heart of this initiative, and I think it can be very, very helpful. So we know that mentoring is crucial for the development career of a young researcher, but we think that it could be very helpful also in local regions to understand how the process works in issues also like visa and connecting with the other members of the diaspora, connecting back home, all these kind of problems. Now, according to a very rough estimate, we think that in North America, US, and Canada, there are about, between 12,000 and 15,000 Italian scientists work at different levels in university and research centers. So lucky for us, more than 4,000 of them are affiliated to ISNAF, the Italian Scientists and Scholars in North America Foundation, which is a no-profit organization based on volunteer work, and I want to emphasize this because, they are not all the same, this kind of, this organization of scientific diasporas. And the science office of my embassy has tried to help and support this organization since the start of the launch of the organization, the foundation, in 2007, 10 years ago. So we usually organize the annual meeting and we try to help them. They are organized in chapters, thematic chapters, and regional ones. So I think that the involvement in this process of the science office of the embassy are very important, especially to reach the sustainability of the organization of the scientific diaspora. As already was mentioned by Vicky, I think it was in November 2014 when we actually had the very first meeting at the Embassy of Italy. It was a very small group of some European science counselors, together with Euraccess, the EU delegation, and some of the organization of this scientific diaspora. It was a very first seed. They need, to meet and discuss best practices and problems and try to understand each other's activities, let's say. And as Vicky mentioned, then this was followed by large annual meetings by Spain and Slovakia, open to larger public or stakeholders, okay? And now in France. So 1 year ago we discussed, we started discussing about mentoring as a first cementing project where we can work all together for a common goal. And actually I remember there was also a meeting at organized by the science office of the Embassy of Austria. So you see science offices have been involved very much in this process. And as Irina reminded, we try to write down a first draft of the proposal for JEMI at this meeting last September at the European Research Day. So I will go through some of these slides. Let's see. It's not this, it's not an arrow. Oh, it's not. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, it was not on, that's why. All right. So the European Commission, as we know, already invests pretty much in research, development, and innovation. So we think that a relatively small further investment in a joint European mentoring initiative, JEMI, could significantly improve, could significantly contribute to a better mapping of the European scientists. So could provide better data and finally improve the return on investment. So this initiative, as we know, would allow European researchers outside Europe to take advantage of best practice from other systems and to integrate it into their professional career development schemes. In the draft, we also mention China and India, that they are well known to invest in their diasporas to create a constant exchange of knowledge and experience. So similarly, JEMI would open a strong channel of cooperation between the diaspora and the embassies. And JEMI would have the capacity to connect new European researchers to their respective regions. And the navigation through, as I said, visa processes, settling, connecting back with home country, understanding how the process works in the new base would be all part of this area of mentoring. So I would like also to remind you that the scientific diaspora play a very important role in the European public diplomacy towards North America. And so I think that JEMI could also promote a broader pan-European global collaborative projects. Let me say, I mean, nowadays it's much more common to have big international projects because you need, more complex facilities to reach further results in science technology, and to share risk and minimize cost. Now it's a common practice to have huge international projects which imply also very high mobility of scientific personnel. I personally have been always an advocate over the universal researcher visa, which I know is not the direction this country is going right now, but I think that it's something, they also, JEMI could consider. And as a platform, JEMI, it would highlight the quality of European academics and emphasize the value of European influence in the North America and US. So this proposed cross-generational network of researchers would unlock the potential to more international interdisciplinary collaborative projects and not tied to an institution, but rather to a goal, the advancement of a European research area. JEMI is not only a knowledge sharing tool, it is an investment in a global-oriented European identity ultimately in the future. And that's it for this part.
Dr. Gerrit Rosler will come and tell us a little bit more about JEMI's vision, the pillars and operations. Is the program manager of the German Center for Research and Innovation in New York. This center facilitates transatlantic collaboration by bridging together leaders in science, the humanities, and technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel, and for all of you for coming out on a Monday morning. It's a great turnout, and thank you for the previous speakers, especially Stefano, for bringing all of this into such a large political and world-bettering context. Makes me feel very special to be part of this. And I have been from that first meeting in the Italian embassy, which I suppose is why I am here to talk about it. I want to go back to the very first slide because I want to point you to the subtitle that we came up with for this panel. It's some of the meat of GEMI, because what Stefano outlined is sort of the grand idea. That's really what we want to accomplish. Those are our big ideas, but obviously between making the world a better place and research a global enterprise without borders and knowledge transfer, there's a lot of nitty-gritty things that we need to accomplish in the meantime. That's kind of what this panel wants to talk about and hopefully excite you about being a part of it. So this slide is just sort of the 5 groups that Irina was talking about in terms of the types of aspects that we had to discuss as a community that wants to establish, bring together, and conceptualize the joint European mentoring initiative. And those are some of the things we'll be talking about in the next couple of steps. What is our mission? What is it actually that we want with such a program? Then pillars, how is it structured? The rationale, and then Gerry will talk about the eligibility, and I will talk a little bit about the operations. So the first thing to remember is what we're trying to draft here is not the full-on GEMI project. This is not something that we hope to design by April as the full-fledged perfect thing. It's a pilot project. It's an attempt to do something grand, kind of like Stefano outlined. So take everything with a grain of salt. It's an experiment. It's a pilot project that we're trying to establish. That means that the mission that I'm going to talk about in 2 seconds is something that can be adapted. Look at it as a living document, and you can be part of it to keep it alive and make it something that goes beyond what we're discussing today. And the same goes for the very format of GEMI, right? It's a mentoring initiative, which I think is the perfect term for it, but what is it? Is it a platform for exchange? Is it a network? We heard a lot about networks this morning. What Your Access is trying to do, is this what GEMI is also? Is it a mentoring system that we're trying to establish? Is it sort of a program? Is it a forum where people can meet and discuss? All of these things we have yet to figure out in detail, and this is where you and your input and your experience come in. This is the mission. It's a long statement, but it took us a long time to come up with it, so I think it deserves to be read in full, which I will do in a second. And this is the result of these workshops, these meetings that were mentioned earlier. So the Joint European Mentoring Initiative, GEMI, is a platform to enable scientists to build and maintain networks within the European science ecosystem to support and collaborate with other researchers with connections to Europe, to advance and develop their careers, and to contribute to the global science community. Now that's a mouthful, but I think it covers everything that we're hoping to accomplish. We're trying to help European researchers to navigate the scientific world, but we don't want to make it sort of an exclusive club just for us. We want Americans that are interested in Europe. We want other potentially worldwide researchers who are interested in Europe to sort of be part of this. And Your Access already does most of this and does a lot of the kind of service providing but this is researcher driven. This is where the researchers themselves match up and the research communities themselves are involved. That's, I think, the big difference. So we came from a very broad understanding of what we think mentoring is and can be, and I think that's very important to keep in mind as well. So we talk about, some of the things we talk about would classically be more labeled coaching, right? Direct advising. It could be mentoring in the classical sense that we establish pairs that sort of talk to each other and give each other advice for long periods of time. Or it could just be a form of training, kind of like we have today, where we have workshops and people discuss specific skill sets and so on. So it could be all of these things. So keep that in mind when we're talking about mentoring. Right now, it's a very broad understanding of what that could be. And below this large box is a great example for how we arrived at all of these preliminary steps and preliminary definitions. We had one of these workshops. One of the brainstorming sessions was to just sort of say what you think about. In this case, what are the 5 essential features of mentoring that we think, what do you think about when you hear mentoring? And we all gave a bunch of definitions and words and so on, and these are sort of the core keywords that emerged from a group of, I think, like 30 people that were brainstorming. So the important ones here are support, mutual support, mutual empowerment, encouragement, helping each other with our development, and that in some form of reciprocity. Okay, so this one here is my favorite. It's actually crazy that it took us only one day to come up with what actually is a pretty solid structure for what we think GEMI should look like. We have 4 pillars and a tool, or 5 pillars, depending on how you look at it. And I'm not going to read all of these squares, but the important thing here is, as you can see, it's a very broad understanding of what GEMI could accomplish that I think goes beyond many of the structures that are already in existence. We want it to be a tool for research career development. We want it to be something that helps people with their networking. We want it to be a tool for knowledge sharing, so your more classic mentoring relationship. And we want it to be, that's very important to me personally, a tool for advocacy. So most of you are postdocs. Most of the science diaspora communities are actually communities for postdocs, and we all know postdocs can do with a little bit more advocacy than they're already experiencing. I know Julie is here from the National Postdoc Association. They're doing great work, but specifically when it comes to internationally mobile researchers, I think something like this could be a great tool. Then the 5th pillar is the web portal, but if you think about it, web portal isn't really, it's a different level of abstraction, right? So the web portal will be one of the tools that we're using to accomplish all these things. So I promise not to go over time. And then under it, you see some of the ideas we had how to accomplish any of these. So advocacy, for example, it would be for research, but also for science as such. You know, today's day is about science communication. It's also advocacy for funding. So we heard a lot about funding this morning that's already available, but there can always be more. There can always be differently tailored structures, differently tailored funding programs, but how do you get them? You get them by talking to the decision makers, and that's the type of advocacy we're talking about. So again, I'm not going to go through all the details, but you see there's a lot of potential there, and a lot of maybe you personally think, I'm great at networking, I hate organizing events, but maybe I can advise some of the committees that organize conferences and events how to make them more suitable for networking. If that's the case, join us and sign up outside at the GEMI booth because we need you then. So I'm going to briefly talk about operations, and I subtitled this slide, A Colossal Undertaking. As you can imagine, even if we get a gigantic grant from the European Commission to do all this, it's still to figure out how all the details work, how do all the different European communities contribute to something like a joint conference rather than Vicky and Deema doing all the work here on the back end. How can we all get involved? That is actually a very complex operational and governance structure that needs to be established. So that's why I said this is really the meat of it. This is really where we need your help, and a lot of work is left. So it would have to go through several stages, right? So instead of one draft, this is how operations are going to be from now on, we're probably, as I said, we're conceiving of this as a pilot project that needs to be various stages of how to create a more and more complex system of operations. Probably start with something that is a minimum of effort. I'm very impressed with some of the membership-driven science communities that have already functioning mentoring programs, like Ikusa, for example, and I think PAPS as well. Yeah, so, and some of them are already larger, some of them are still very small with like 2 or 3 mentoring pairs a year. We, as the German science community, are rather well funded. We have a large membership base, but we don't have a mentoring program, right? So this is sort of where I say various stages of operations, start with a small idea and then grow it rather than just go for the big thing and then that possibly be too much to chew. Yeah, eventually, hopefully, we'll have a large global mentoring system where all scientists in the world can be mentored by one another, but obviously that's a couple of years down the road. And yeah, so I just want to highlight some of the operational steps to consider. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, mostly because these are just ideas. These are just conceptual stages to consider. We would need to build some kind, GEMI would have to become some kind of institution. It can't just be something that Deema and Vicky do on the side with your access, so we have to develop some sort of board of directors that reviews the selection processes, that reviews operations and so on. We would have to establish various working groups that figure out how to get funding and how to raise funds for the program. As I said, the web portal is a very important tool, so we would have to figure out some kind of IT structure. We would have to find people to maintain it. We have to design and fill with content a website. And obviously, for something that is pan-European, operating in the US, there are legal things to consider. And then on the second stage, obviously, if we have funding and we can actually hire a person to do that for us, some kind of executive director or director of operations, that contains this whole other set of challenges in terms of how do we administer that kind of thing, right? How do we ensure, the question earlier was how do we ensure success, right? In this case, how do we ensure quality? How do we ensure that the mentoring pairs are actually doing something meaningful and that they're actually working? All of this will require input from the communities and will require a strong governance and operations structure to maintain that. Hopefully, once we have a couple of mentoring pairs, say the first mentoring pair is matched for a year or two after that, so we would create something like alumni. I think in terms of alumni, we were also thinking about Marie Curie and ERC grantees that could then become mentors for people who want to get these types of grants in the future, but that too, the database would have to be managed and we as GEMI would have to somehow be able to get access to it. Again, mentor-mentee management, how do we even identify potential mentors? How do we identify potential mentees and how do we match them meaningfully? So all of this is a massive undertaking, like I said, a colossal undertaking. This is not to scare you, this is actually, the idea is to encourage you to participate and give your input. Maybe you already have some ideas. This is just generally sort of for the grand vision, right? So hopefully eventually we could have regional meetings, we could have alumni events, training workshops and so on to continue this idea of networking as one of the major pillars. And in terms of career development, there are other events and structures and processes that could be involved. All of this under the general umbrella of mentoring, coaching, training, that we would establish as part of GEMI. So all of these slides, all of these bullet points, all of this were results of the aforementioned workshops and brainstorming sessions. And another important thing to consider, which would be the next presenter, is for whom are we actually doing this? So this is like where I pass the baton, but again, just the idea was look at it as a very complex issue to face, and we would love your input to do that. Thank you.
Dr. Harry Allens is a Marie Curie Fellow at the Purdue School of Global Studies at Boston University and is an assistant professor at the International Relations at the Department of Political Science at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, the Netherlands. She's going to talk to us about eligibility. Thank you for coming.
So eligibility could actually be quite a thorny issue. I think, as Gerrit stated earlier, during the meeting in September, we also really discussed what is realistic. And in Dutch, we have an expression which translated would be as much as the one who pays is the one who decides. I guess that many nationalities have a certain expression like that, even if it sounds differently. But what we mean by that is that at this point, it's uncertain who will be paying for this initiative. So if there is money from the European Commission, we all know, as has been said earlier, about the drain, not the brain drain, but the brain exchange kind of thing. The European Commission usually likes people to return to Europe after they have gained knowledge abroad, that they implement the knowledge in Europe for the good and the benefit of Europe and European competition. So we actually thought that whether you eligibility, what you actually want, depends on where you stand. So if you're a researcher, you would want everyone to be eligible to be either a mentor or a mentee, because we all want to benefit and we want to help each other. On the other hand, if you're the one paying this scheme, whether it be Diasporas or mainly the European Commission, you would have some demands that you do not want to sponsor just anyone here, because it does cost a lot of money. If we do it the way we have the grand scheme in mind, it will be a colossal undertaking indeed, and there will be quite a bit of money involved. So that's why I didn't come up with a conclusion here of this is what it's going to be like, but a number of questions that we have to answer, and the answers to which will partly depend on actually who's going to arrange this and pay for this. So do we want Europeans only or other nationals as well? I think both the European Commission and researchers would want both. The thing only is that it also depends on the mobility direction that people have in mind. So if we're talking about Marie Curie fellows like myself, we come from Europe in this case, go to the US, but there are also Marie Curie fellows actually from the US or Canada that go to Europe and return to North America. We think all these people would be interested, whether like at the postdoctoral level or as PhD students or even as like tenured professors, would be interested in either acting as mentors or mentees. The only thing is that if we have people living in America that are really planning to stay here, whether they're American or European, it could be that the Commission wouldn't really like to sponsor their mentoring scheme, because the question is whether they will get anything out of it. Well, as a researcher, I would argue that as soon as Europeans are abroad doing their research, that part of the world becomes a part of Europe. We are just spreading the European research area all over the world. And I think the Commission should be very proud of us researchers. I think deepening our knowledge here and contributing to science that is worldwide. And although perhaps the world or even the European Commission may not be quite ready for that yet, I think it is where we are heading towards in the future. So in the debate, we acknowledge that there are issues here, particularly financial issues and the consequences of eligibility, but that we also have certain goals that we would like to achieve, and in that sense we would like to keep it open. And then talking about qualifying as mentor or as mentee. We don't only look at it as mentoring by someone who is very experienced for someone who is not so experienced yet. It could also be peer mentoring. What many Marie Curie fellows actually are doing is helping PhD students either from here or from Europe that also want to have a Marie Curie by sharing their knowledge, giving feedback on their proposals. And this is, at the moment, informal mentoring going on, but it could be included in a scheme like this. Same would go for ERC grantees, you named them already. That would be very interesting, both for Americans and for Europeans. What we also discussed last September, because we have a few master students in the audience here and in the program then, is there are American universities where we have master students who would like to do a PhD in Europe. And they could certainly benefit from mentoring by people with European research experience in how to get a grant or how to apply for the right positions. So I hope it can be a very wide initiative, but I also wish to maintain realistic and that in the short term we perhaps may not be able to do all we want right away. What is important for us is that whether you're either a mentee or a mentor, there should be some European experience or European motivation involved. We're not here for the Canadians or Americans who are only focused on North America. We are here for the people who want to have something to do with Europe in research collaboration and exchange and mobility. And I think as long as we stick to that, then we could have a very nice GEMI here. Then from two personal perspectives. So I am Dutch myself. We don't have a scientific diaspora here in Washington, at least not that I know of yet, but they have been saying yet for quite a while. And it has been, I think, almost a year ago that I filled out a form telling that I am indeed here. And it was not only for scientists, it was very broad for entrepreneurs and people just working anywhere. So it was more, they're making a database of Dutch higher educated citizens in North America. And that's a bit wider than what we are doing here. So I hope something will be happening there. But one of my first worries was, for example, if there is no diaspora that's paying into this kind of scheme, are Dutch nationals eligible to take part in it? If the European Commission finances it, yes, of course. But if it would be really a diaspora initiative, then it's questionable. There would have to be a buy-in of some kind. So I do hope it will be as broad as possible, if only that I could also benefit. Secondly, my second personal perspective would be from the MCAA North America chapter. I think, if I want to use a French expression, that people in the Marie Curie chapter are people par excellence that would benefit from an initiative like this, but could also contribute to it. Because we do not only have current fellows, and as I said, current fellows are already helping out other people who want these types of funding, but we also have many alumni, and the number is increasing, so I think even more than half of our members currently are alumni. They're based both in North America and in Europe, and they could act both as mentors and mentees. Within the MCAA in general, so they have their headquarters in Brussels, a mentoring initiative has already started with a digital platform. It's just in its early phase. But I do hope that it's something that we as with GEMI could tap into or connect with, and that we learn from what others are already doing and, well, use the resources as efficiently as possible. Thank you.
Dr. Deema Mahmoud has been a precursor of GEMI from the start. She's the responsible for some of the challenging questions we got the day of the workshops. And it is my pleasure to invite her on stage to come and tell us more about the moving forward. She's a humanist, activist, and passionate change maker. And I'm very happy to have met you. You can read more about her bio on the paperwork. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. It's great and highly emotional being here. It's happening. We said it would in September. One correction, I was not part of this from the start. I wish I was. But seeing the potential, I only joined Euraccess in January, and just seeing the potential and the work that was put into GEMI immediately outlined the first event we were going to host, which was ERD in September, European Research Day, and we dedicated two, if I may say so, great hands-on workshops where everyone was really invited to roll up their sleeves and answer some of the very tough questions that we had. We have an overview of what GEMI is, and I think it's very clear that it is very much a work in progress. Much like the image that Xavi used earlier for the top projects and the continuation of the top projects, GEMI is very much the same. We have had the first round of discussions of best practices and the importance of investing in mentoring in our last annual meeting, for which the report is on the GEMI table. And then we had this ERD project workshops with the report that was produced. I just want to go back and ask you to reflect on some of the keywords that you've heard so far on the day, from the first panel and so far from my colleagues on the panel. You've heard career planning, you've heard research career development, you've heard talent management, networking, capacity building, academia to industry, promotion, support, and that is truly the essence of GEMI. Why now? Why are we rolling up our sleeves and saying, that's it, the management team is set and we are moving forward? Well, because the funding is out. As we heard, there are a lot of projects that are promoting networking, that are promoting mentoring, that are seeking the investment in this broader pan-European platform for research career development. And so why not now? We've gotten the skeleton out of the way, and we now have a management team, other way, which I will actively invite you and find you outside and invite you again to join the management team. We have 4 working groups. I realize now that the choice of color might not be the best, but we have proposals and budgets, and in there we're going to be sending out a lot of proposals to the Commission, to other funding agencies on getting the work that we're asking you to do funded. We appreciate your time, and we need it to be supported moving forward. So for the proposals and budgets working group, we will have a proposal writing, we will have budget building, so a group of people looking into how much it would really cost to achieve this the undertaking that is colossal. We're also going to have a group of them looking for grants and funding opportunities that could be applied or partnered with GEMI. Then we have the matching scheme working group. What is really the best way to connect these mentors and mentees? Is the mentee looking for a professional career development, or is it more personal growth? Is it a bit of both? So we're going to look at the questions to be asked in the profiles and developing the algorithm or the mechanism for pairing or matchmaking the mentors and mentees. Then we have the database building, where we're going to be looking who these potential mentors and mentees are, where the potential institutions, whether in Europe or here in North America, that would be interested in collaborating and moving forward, and obviously eventually putting out the call for the mentors and mentees. Finally, and that's the sort of the elephant in the room, who is really going to manage all these workshops and facilitate these workshops moving forward. And yes, there was always the question of Euraxis being entirely dependent on the diasporas moving forward, joining and putting their input. And while that's a huge part of it, we have gotten the input. And with the diasporas who have been with us from the beginning, it is definitely time for them to see a return on the investment of their time. So we have the working groups. We are extending the invitation. The call is now open to contribute your expertise in whatever capacity. If it's one of the tasks of the working groups, if you see something that is missing here that we need to look into, by all means, find Vicky, myself, anyone on the panel, or sign up to the management team, and we will be following up and calling for your contributions and your inputs with every step of the way, as I'm sure each and every panel member here can attest that we will do. And you don't have time. There's a lot on your plate already. We understand. We're all juggling quite a bit. So how else can you get involved beyond being hands-on with the working groups and the management team? Sign up to our mailing list. Stay up to date. If we're having a impact circle or a roundtable discussion on one of the working groups or one of the aspects, you'll be in the know. And if you feel that is something you can contribute to, you can get in touch with us and actually be present. You can help us build the database, because we will be sending surveys, we will be sending you times to fill in your profiles, and so that we can access this information when it's time to open the call for mentors and mentees. And last but not least, I think I've briefly said it, the surveys. We will be really going back to you once again to see what it is you would like to see from this pilot project. The goal, yes, a global mentoring initiative, but given the limitations or the restrictions that we have so far with the resources, how would you like the pilot GEMI project, which is piloting out of North America, look like? Thank you very much.
Thank you all for contributing and explaining what GEMI is. And as a wrap-up, it is a work in progress. Be engaged. And it's for everyone and anyone that wants to learn more, basically. And sign up. The table is outside. Ask questions to us, another, and there is a next slide. Yeah, there is the boxes are outside, right? Yeah, if you want to know what those boxes are about, yeah, go to the table outside, right? Thank you so much, and now the floor is open for questions. Questions. Microphone, please, to the front. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction to GEMI. I have been part of this ERD meeting, and I can witness that this is really a bottom-up type of initiative. I have a question for you, maybe Victoria and Deema. Did you approach your authority at the European Commission? Did you start a discussion with them to prepare them to this initiative? And then, if so, what's their feedback?
Subtlety is not one of our strongest suits. We have dropped hints, we have sent proposals, we have sent initial proposals and follow-up proposals. Yes, we have reached out to the office in Brussels and to our project coordinators. There is a support in seeing how this evolves, how it moves forward, and there is an interest in potentially investing, and I think that's where the contact with the other Euraccess projects, Euraccess Europe, and the top projects as well come in handy. There is definitely an area of overarching, and we have the support, yes.
So hi, thank you all for the presentation and for the amazing initiative. I have a question about the pilot project. As from my understanding, is it going to be focused on academia? Do you plan to expand it to transition to another career afterwards? Thank you.
So that's a great question, and from the beginning, I think it was clear that part of the areas where mentoring is necessary is, for example, transitioning from academia into industry, for people who are thinking about creating spin-offs or things of the like. No, it wouldn't be just academia. It would be industry as well. It would be the startup community, innovation communities, and so on, would be invited to contribute in one form or another. What exactly that might look like, again, that's something we have to work out in detail with all your all's help, but it's definitely beyond just academia, and it's definitely beyond just the STEM fields.
I'm going to add one thing. I'm the moderator, but I'm going to add to your answer because I'm in industry and I see the value of it. I think once we have our own profiles and those are tagged to keywords, and it's clear that X amount of people are working in industry, then in this ideal application form, you would look for those if you are interested in knowing more about industry. Many times it's not only for the transition, but it's I'm in academia, but I want to do collaborations with industry. I want to find ways and avenues of people that work in industry and eventually a particular side field of industry. I can see a lot of value on that.
May Yeah, I understand that you invite us to contribute as an individual level for some of the boxes there, but as embassies, can we do something towards our governments? What could help?
Yes, please. This is obviously, it's open to an individual contribution as well as an organizational contribution. If you're part of an organized diaspora and your entire diaspora wants to contribute, welcome, please. Embassies, yes, there's plenty to be done. First of all, your expertise as to what are the things looked at for the proposals to submit to the Commission. In the one-pager that we have, I guess in my excitement, I didn't mention that we have a one-pager that is a essential briefing of what GEMI is, the mission, the objectives, and the rationale. And in that, one of the things we're doing is to hopefully submit a GEMI proposal to the Commission by April 2018. Your office would be, we would be very grateful for suggestions and feedback onto these proposal, and then perhaps even we can ask for a letter of support or endorsement from your embassy as someone who has been involved from the get-go and seeing the importance in investing this in this initiative. So it can be a pre-crafted letter which your access would put together, or a personally crafted one where you can underline the specific angles of GEMI that would be of use or of interest for your embassy, absolutely. And on an individual basis as well, in a diaspora, if you are in touch with a particular funding institution or an academic institution back home that you think would be interested in collaborating with GEMI, would be interested in potentially offering some of their faculty as mentors, please do get in touch. There are many ways to get involved with moving forward with GEMI, and we welcome all the input. As we said, all hands on deck. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I will give the microphone to you, but I wanted to add to this that essentially we would love to have the European Commission fund this initiative, because that would be the overarching, the most common sense, because this is a European platform already, and if you could get funding from them, that would be perhaps ideal, or the best, maybe not the best, but ideal. Obviously, you all know there's a Horizon 2020 program out until 2020. The new work program for 2018 and 2020 is out. So we will look into those opportunities. And one of the working groups that we discussed and we talked about is going to look into some of the calls or some of the options that perhaps this 3-year work program under Horizon 2020 could offer, because essentially we are talking about science diplomacy here. So we are connecting the 2 continents as a pilot program, and then perhaps we can build on that and we can expand it later on to other global hubs. So one of the working groups will be looking into the possibility of funding under different calls that might come out in the next 3 years. But if that's not going to happen, if we don't find a call under Horizon 2020, or there's nothing that would actually match our what we are trying to do with GEMI, and then match it to a certain call, it's not going to stop us, because we've already started the engines, and we are definitely not going backward, but we will be going forward. So we want to go and talk to other funding agencies, be them European agencies, either based in Europe or North America, or we also want to involve our American and Canadian partners. I was, for example, recently talking to MyTax, which is a Canadian-based institution, and they offer a lot of funding to researchers, be it Canadian or global fellowships, and they are interested in buying in. They are interested in funding part of GEMI. And as Heri said, how did you say that? Who pays? How was it? Who? Yeah, who pays is the one who signs. So, you know, if they contribute with some funding, then we can go also to our American partners or European partners across the board and see how we could put perhaps the bits and pieces together and create the GEMI puzzle to be full and complete. So this is just something that I wanted to kind of throw in. Also, your ideas are very welcome. And if, you know, one of the embassies decides that, you know, they have $1,000 laying in the corner of the embassy and they have nothing to do with that, we'll welcome that too.
Hi, I'm Lori Brown with the American Chemical Society. I saw that advocacy was one of your pillars. I was wondering if you all could expand a little bit more about your ideas around advocacy. Will it just be geared towards EU policymakers or what?
So, well, the answer is a little bit ambiguous, like most of the things we were able to say at this point. It kind of depends on how it grows. I think in the beginning, the most significant element of advocacy would be to provide a voice to European researchers that are working in the United States and Canada in terms of, you know, any type of policy discussion. So it could be to advocate within Europe about, look, there's all these European researchers abroad and they need the following things, and we need a voice at the table when policy decisions are made, and we could, GEMI could then form the voice of the European researcher abroad. It could be a voice for European researchers in the United States when it comes to policy making decisions at, say, the National Science Foundation or anywhere where postdoc fates are impacted or early career researcher fates are impacted in one form or another. As I mentioned earlier, the NPA, for example, is doing a fantastic job being the voice of postdocs in the United States, and a lot of them are international and internationally mobile researchers. Yet there is no specific representation of internationally mobile researchers, specifically European researchers, in the United States as such, and GEMI could be that. That's at least what we're hoping. Yeah.
And just to add to that, we're also thinking, as part of the advocacy was advocacy for funding, and this kind of funding is for funding opportunities for research-oriented projects as well as policy-oriented research. Because again, this all goes into the cycle of the things that affect the researchers and affect the work they do while they're abroad. So advocacy in that sense as well, because we all need the money, let's be honest.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Michelle Zalzman. I'm the representative for Science Abroad, the organization of Israeli scientists around the world. And it sounds like this ambitious and amazing project may benefit from something we do in the academia too. You know, you can ask for a grant as a researcher, and you can ask for a grant as a group of researchers. Have you considered also collaborating with multiple organizations that already have existing infrastructures in their own countries? So for example, you've taken the entire European community. Have you also considered applying for grants jointly with multiple other organizations? Because it sounds like that will be an amazing opportunity.
It's working. Yes, we have. We actively are. We, on the side in our offices, both Vicky and I have a, for lack of better terminology, hit list for the organizations to partner with, collaborate with, approach for that. Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I'm Ramton Weiss from the Office of Science and Technology, Austria. I had a question in terms of development and whether there have been considerations on the topics such as in-kind donations. Because when I hear database, I'm thinking, perhaps SAP might like to donate database infrastructure, or perhaps within the very elaborate setup you outline in terms of project management and the people you would need to come on board, I would perhaps also suggest adding someone on the development side who can actively go out to the private industry and kind of draw out the value proposition, because, you know, as Vicky said, you know, maybe there's 1,000 euros lying around in the embassy, but maybe there are hundreds of thousands euros lying around at the BMW group, which would love to join an initiative such as Jamie. Food for thought.
Thank you. Yes, and we should probably talk after this. Absolutely. If you have your hit list as well, we can exchange notes. Yes. We have a question up here, I believe. Bottini? Rachel? Who will be the leading institution? Well, Your Access North America has hesitantly assumed that position, though very excited for it. We really do, we're very cautious to make this seem like it's an initiative that Your Access North America started on its own. As we've emphasized throughout this panel, it has been a very much bottom-up approach with all the diasporas that were involved from the beginning and the science counselors that were there. But in order to move forward, yes, someone needed to step into that position, and it is Your Access North America.
Once we've established sort of a little bit more of a governance structure, once we know a little bit more who's in, who's out, what kind of organizations will be part of it, who's interested in donating, we will have to come up with a more clearly established governance structure. And part of that will be whether or not we need to establish some kind of legal entity. So at some point we discussed, for example, in order to apply for a lot of funding, do we need like an established nonprofit that is GEMI, and then the diasporas and individual members are members of that nonprofit, and then that legal entity can write applications. But at this point, we're, as Deema said, a little hesitant to fully define what it's going to look like, because we don't really know what the necessary steps are. So thankfully, we have your access to help us along these first couple of steps where we're still trying to figure that out. But eventually, it could be a nonprofit, it could be some kind of other defined legal body that then like a body of other organizations and so on. I mean, we'll have to see.
Yes, Lyuboya Ostrovska, STEM Center, a small biotech company located in Maryland. I have a very practical question. So I understand that a lot of efforts were put into building this management structure and the vision of this organization. Since the time when the idea came up, did you build any mentorship relationship, not you personally, but you know, some peers that you refer to, and do they work effectively? What are the results? What is the practical output of this, you know, of your efforts, tremendous efforts? And thank you for doing that. Probably it's necessary, but what is the reality?
Okay, so what I know Your Access has done in the meantime is actually contacted different existing mentoring initiatives. So some of the diasporas have their own mentoring initiatives, which could be like included in the whole, because now they have more like a more narrow number of mentees and mentors that could be broadened. But I know that there have also been contacts with Canada and systems that are working there. So I think we're still in the process of learning from what is out there to copy the good things and not to do the bad things that may happen elsewhere. And where we can tap into the resources that others already have, we certainly will.
I'll just quickly add on to that, as part of the working groups was the matching algorithm, and the goal for this specific working group is to have the profiles ready so that while we're ready to submit the GEMI proposal to the European Commission by April, we'd also like to have an open call for a certain number of mentors and mentees for a mini pilot round, so to speak. So that's the next step for us as well. Thank you.
Last question.
Yes, this Dietrich Haubenberger from Austria. Thanks for this enormous work that went into this project that started, a few years ago with some ideas and starting off with some practices and where to go. In that line that was mentioned before, I think that's also my comment that I had, as a scientist myself. Usually when you submit for big grants like that, usually you're expected to show pilot data and that your idea works. The likelihood to get an R01 grant is zero if you don't have any pilot data. So I think I would also recommend to get pilots out of the door as soon as possible. And it's, I think, even better if the scope is small and more narrow, because the danger can always be that the project itself becomes so big that it's hard to deliver at that point. And if you show, I think, in certain areas, not only by numbers but also in terms of scope, that this works, this would be certainly great. And one suggestion can be even the existing mentoring programs in the different countries to bring them under even just a framework and umbrella. I don't see any reason why an ASTINA mentoring program can't be an ASTINA mentoring program partnered with your access. And the one thing that comes on top of that is some sort of a framework, and some, let's put in an evaluation instrument that provides your access also data that can help, bring in then, submit a bigger grant submission. I think that would be really critical, I think, for the next year also to get that pilot out of the door.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, establishing what this framework is exactly what we've been trying to showcase today and trying to introduce. I mean, it's, as I said, there's all these existing mentoring programs, so the need is there, and you, with ASTINA, know very well how that works and what the value is. And what we've been trying to do is bring all these different organizations to the table and see what the needs are, and so the next step, as Deema said, is matching people up, and hopefully it will take off from there.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you all for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day.